Well, not welcome back because we came straight from the prior panel, but thank you for staying with us into our final session of the day. It's been a wonderful afternoon. We've heard from a lot of great speakers, and this one is not going to disappoint either. It's being moderated by Eric Cunningham from Elections Daily, and joining him are Drew Savick, freelance political analyst and mapper, and J. Miles Coleman, associate editor of Larry Sabato's Crystal Ball at the UVA's University of Virginia's Center for Politics. So with that, Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you to, in conjunction with your two fine panelists, explain to the world what it is you guys do. Take it away, Eric.
All right, so thanks for having us. This is my first time doing something big like this, but we're really excited to be here. So what we kind of do is we focus a lot on the data, and I guess this is what I would describe as most common. So whether it's trying to look at congressional maps, trying to draw them and figure out how things could be done, or come up with the maximal or minimal amount of districts that you can have for one party in a state. I know a big topic recently has been gerrymandering. How many, some states have very divided electorates, but the seats they return to Congress are 70 to 80% one party, even though they're only getting, the party that's in the minority might actually have more votes. So that's kind of one thing to look at is with redistricting ahead in 2020, or 2022, you're using the 2020 census results. That's gonna be really important to look at for the future of stuff, state legislatures in particular, because they draw the congressional maps. Another angle that it's looked at is from something like QGIS, which I can't use it that well. The other two guys here, Miles and Drew, are great at it. And that's definitely focused more on the results of elections, so elections passed. So if the redistricting from a map like Dave's redistricting app is looking at the future, the election precincts are looking at what's happened or what has happened in the past to see trends. So I guess I'll just kind of throw it off to either Miles or Drew to kind of explain some of the basics, as we've got a good number of maps to kind of demonstrate what's kind of going on and what options and things parties can look for going forward, and especially people can look at, because this is a very democratized process. Anyone can do this.
Yes, and I think, sort of what Eric was talking about in terms of we see gerrymandering as an important issue that's come to the public kind of consciousness within the past 50 years. Probably a perfect example of that is at the Crystal Ball yesterday, we just did a few rating changes for the House of Representatives. And even though Wisconsin, for example, is a state that is that's probably the quintessential purple state. It has 8 congressional districts, and because of some factors, maybe including gerrymandering, it has 8 congressional districts, but we rate them. Each congressional district is now safe for either their party. So you have some states like Wisconsin, Eric's and Drew are both in North Carolina. You have a lot of these states that are maybe competitive at the overall level, but because of some factors like gerrymandering, that doesn't really translate to the House or the state legislature. So that's kind of one of the things that we look at. And this whole kind of thing with us mappers on Twitter, it's been fairly a recent thing. I remember after before the 2016 election, it was basically me and this other guy, his name is Matthew Isbell out of Florida. We were more or less only 2, but now it's been this nice community online. We're starting to get some pretty good recognition. I know just in this past week, Mr. Drew here has announced he's going to start as a writer for 270win.com. Eric has been doing a very good job with elections daily. So it's become sort of a nice thing. So Eric, we had a few maps. I don't know if we want to jump right into those.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
Oh,
Yeah. So I'll pull up Drew's maps first. I think those are kind of those kind of demonstrate a little bit of the predictive factor. Let me pull this up on here.
Sure.
Oops, just a second. Got one of these privacy setting things. But so basically, we've got a few maps. We've got several from Drew, several from Miles, and then one that I made. Although it's really multiple maps in one. So let me pull this. Oops. Just a second, trying to pull this up on here. Here we go. Oh, come on. Sorry, having to pull up the Zoom screen sharing thing. So one thing to look at with these is kind of how differences are between elections. So sometimes you'll look at this, you'll look at one election and you'll look at a state, right? And you'll wonder how the state can vote one way at one level, and on the other level also do the same thing, or do a different thing. So let me try and, actually, do either of you have access to that? I'm trying to pull it up and it's just not working on my end.
Yeah, it looks like I can share my screen. Let's see.
We all have access to that Google file.
Yeah, let me try to share my screen. Eric, which one are we going to share?
Start with the first one. I think the first one is one of Drew's.
Let's see.
I believe it's of Montana, which is an interesting state.
Okay.
Yeah, very interesting state, especially this cycle. One race to look at is the Montana Senate race. The presidential level, very safe state. It's going to go to Donald Trump by a large margin. The Senate race might be close.
Yes,
Perfect.
that looks good. Yeah.
So, okay, what's this, Drew?
So Blaine County, Montana has been a reliable bellwether county at the presidential level for many, many years now. It's only had, I believe, one miss in the past 17 cycles or so. It consistently votes for whoever wins the presidency. And as such, you can often see such large swings between cycles. Primarily because Blaine, like many of these western counties that vote for Democrats, American population. And a lot of the times Democratic strength depends on getting those Native American voters out to vote. Reservations tend to be located in very rural areas where access to a lot of basic services are tougher for people out there. They don't necessarily have great access to things like broadband internet. The Postal Service, mail access is a big issue for people in those areas. And so getting your message out there for Democratic candidates can really be a struggle, as these voters will just opt for a Republican if you don't otherwise make an attempt at reaching out to them.
All right. Do we want left Drew's their map as well now?
Yeah, we can go ahead and do that.
Sure. All right.
And it's definitely one thing to look at, is because that Senate race is the governor of Montana, the incumbent governor, Steve Bullock, is a two-term governor. He's very popular in Montana. He's going up against a Republican for Senate, Steve Daines, who's also pretty popular. I mean, he's about where you expect a Republican in Montana to be. But the race is looking to be close. It's looking to be very close. And a lot of it is because of those local characteristics. Like even a lot of times you can look at a red state and they'll vote for Democrats down the ballot, down to the county level. There are some counties that voted for Trump by absurd margins, and you would never think a Democrat could even compete. And yet these are office holders that have been there for years. For example, a county right above me, my county, Alexander County, has a Democratic sheriff. I think it gave Trump 70% of the vote. So just keep an eye on that sort of dynamic. You'll find that a lot when you look at this sort of county and state level results.
All right.
Actually, this looks like it's Vermont.
so this was my very first map I produced about 2.5 years ago now. This shows the 1988 to 2016 president swing. Blue is where, where Clinton did better than Dukakis, and red is where Trump did better than George Bush. It's a relatively basic map, but it just shows how much I've learned over the past several years. And yeah, it's just a neat little throwback.
And then we had one more view, Drew. Let me pull that one up, which I think in my opinion, this is probably one of my favorite maps I've seen from you, like maybe ever. So let's look at that one.
Yeah. So Connecticut's 4th district, the suburban swing ongoing before Trump cycles. And Chris Shays had been a moderate Republican congressman representing southwestern Connecticut for ages. I mean, since the late 1980s. And then along came Barack Obama in 2008, and he carried this upscale suburban district by 20 points. It was just too much for Chris Shays to overcome. Even despite his personal popularity, he was, a relatively liberal Republican. He just couldn't overcome that partisanship anymore. And so these kinds of cases, it isn't just Trump that started this. This has been ongoing for a long time.
So, like, is this a historically Republican type of area?
Yes. Southwestern Connecticut is traditionally the most Republican part of the state. Some of these towns like New Canaan and Darien hadn't voted Democratic for president in 1964, and then they voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, both by double digits. These are upscale white suburbanites. These are people who probably make somewhere around $80,000 to $100,000 a year. These are the kinds of voters Republicans used to rely on for many, many years. And now they're starting to shift away from the party.
Okay, well, I guess I'll get my maps out of the way now, Eric. So this this map I'm going to share next. So this is going to be this was my very first map after the 2016 presidential election. I remember I made this probably the morning of Wednesday morning when Hillary still hadn't conceded the election. And this is obviously Minnesota. And one of the things that was really striking was, to me, I thought, okay, well, Donald Trump, he's kind of an abrasive candidate. In Minnesota, they have the whole Minnesota nice thing. He's never going to play well there. Well, guess what? I'm looking at that, I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe I was wrong there. So it turned out that Trump was the first came closer to carrying the state of Minnesota than any Republican since Ronald Reagan in 1984. And you can see he did very well in a lot of the rural areas. Believe it or not, as Eric and Drew can definitely appreciate, if I posted this map on Twitter today, I would have a lot of comments. Oh, well, land doesn't vote. You need to resize that, you need to shade it differently. But this is what,
you would have to shade it by economic relevance.
Yeah, it's like we're to the point now where we make memes out of a lot of this stuff. But this was a pretty shocking result at the time. Donald Trump lost the state by about 1.5 percentage points, even with all that red. But what I'm going to show you next is, okay, well, maybe if you look back at some of the trends that we saw, maybe this isn't really such a surprising result. And
Trump actually ran better in Minnesota than he did nationally. Nationally, he lost the popular vote by around 2 or 3%. And he only lost Minnesota by 1.5%. It was actually to the right of the country for the first time since, I think,
the 1950s. 70s. Yeah, I think it was the first time saying so, 50s. So, okay, this kind of as Drew was showing with some of those, with his Connecticut map. some of these trends have been going on since before Trump. The last time, for example, the Republicans were able to win a race in Minnesota for the United States Senate was in 2002. That year, you can see the Democrat Walter Mondale did very well in the Twin Cities area, but the Democrats' really other bastion outside of the Twin Cities has historically been the 8th congressional district, up on what they call the Iron Range. Unlike the other two Democratic seats, the 8th district was culturally conservative, but stuck with the Democratic Party because it was tended to be heavily unionized. But if you look at some of the that very next Senate election in 2008, it was about a 50-50 race. That's when in the 2008 wave, Al Franken, the Democrat, was able to oust Norm Coleman, the Republican. Of course, in my presentation, I have to do a math of a Coleman losing, right? But you can see if you look at the change between these two elections, almost all of Franken's his gains came within the urban and suburban areas of the state, whereas most of the outer parts of the state swung much more Republican. So this is, I think, a very good probably indication of where the state was headed a few years before even Trump came along. And then we can even see that looking at some more, I got one more map, looking at one of the more recent elections. So Amy Klobuchar, when she ran for president this last year, she's really the one who turned electability into this buzzword. She would always say, okay, well, every time I ran in my state, I won every congressional district, I won Michelle Bachmann's seat, which, given that Minnesota is only a light blue state, she's pretty much an electoral juggernaut there. So what I did here was, okay, well, how impressive really is her victory? So in 2018, Amy Klobuchar, after Trump was elected, she won by something like 24 points. But if you look at that previous midterm, 2014, even though 2014 was a pretty red anti-Obama midterm, Minnesota was one of the few states where the Democrats did fairly well throughout the Obama era. And even in 2014, Al Franken by that time was pretty popular. He won by about 10, 11 points. But if you look at where the state changed in between Franken and Klobuchar, you can see that Klobuchar, comparatively, she won by basically double the margin that Al Franken did. Most of her improvements came in the Twin Cities area, but even though she won by much more of an overall margin, once you move out to the rural parts of the state, it's a bit of a mixed bag. So maybe for a predictive type of, context, well, what would this mean for 2020? Well, maybe when we get to the fall, maybe Joe Biden has some more room to improve over Hillary in the suburbs. But I think, okay, could he maybe do better in some of the rural types of areas? Maybe. If maybe another perfect example of that is looking at some of the House races. Mm-hmm. Maybe one of the last old school type of blue dogs left in Congress is Representative Colin Peterson, who represents the western part of the state. And a lot of it has trended pretty red. The Donald Trump won Peterson's seat by something like 31 points. So it's the reddest seat held by a Democrat. And I think that if Peterson loses in November, he's pretty much done everything right as an incumbent. He's tended to lots of the agriculture interests in his district, but the fact that Klobuchar still underperformed Franken in most of his counties, if he loses, that's probably a sign that, okay, he's a good incumbent, but the ground has just moved too far the other way. So I think that's going to be an interesting race to watch. So those were basically all my maps.
Yeah, and Peterson has actually been, this is kind of rare for a Republican this cycle, he's actually been outraised by their presumptive Republican opponent. She still has to clear a primary, but her name's Michelle Fishbach. She has outraised him so far, which is, if you know anything about small dollar donations, the stuff that's been coming out of Win Blue, it's not that common, especially in swing seats. You're seeing a lot of Democratic money advantage this time. This is the dynamic Republicans had a hard time dealing with in 2018.
Eric, do you want me to bring up your map?
Sure, go ahead. And so this is a different type of map. So what they've done is they focused on county and local precinct level results. I focused more on a demographic and political trend. So one interesting thing about my state is a lot of people think that North Carolina is trending Democratic, which is kind of true. If you look at the big picture, we went from a state Republicans won, George Bush won, I think, by 10 or 11 points in 2004, to a state Obama won by less than a percentage point. It was the closest state in the country, aside from, I think, Missouri that year. McCain narrowly won Missouri. But North Carolina was the closest after that. The thing is, since then, Republicans have done really well. They have won the state legislature. They've won all the Senate races. They won the gubernatorial race. They lost it in 2016, but they got very close to winning it back. And so one thing that I look at is it trending to the right? Is North Carolina truly doomed to vote Democratic forever, if you want to look at it that way? The answer is no. So if you kind of look at the map here, Obama, this would actually probably be a little more useful if I had some presidential results, but if you look at the areas Democrats have won, they have gained in. They've gained in Mecklenburg, which is the home of Charlotte. They've gained in Wake County, the home of Raleigh. These are counties with 1 million people. They've gained there. They gained in Orange County, which is Chapel Hill, Durham, and Chatham, which are Research Triangle college areas. They gained in Guilford, which is the home of Greensboro. It's another area with lots of colleges, very diverse population. And then they have gained in Nash and Wilson, which are two rural, generally areas. The rest of the state, aside from Asheville, Buncombe County, very liberal. If you actually go there, it's kind of like San Francisco. It's like the San Francisco of the East. It's very liberal in terms of the populace. The rest of the state has trended right. And a lot of it is trended right by very, very strong margins. Look at some of those mountain counties. So for example, Jackson County. This is the county Obama won in 2008. It's a college county. It has a Native American population that's fairly substantial to the east. It's trended 10 points to the right. Trump won it by a good margin. You look at counties, Robeson County. This is
I was about to bring that one up.
Yeah, that's Miles's favorite county. This is a county, it's about 33% white. It is the most diverse county in the country that voted for Donald Trump. And it's trended right because of the Lumbee Indian population. They're socially conservative, fiscally more liberal, but in recent years, they have trended sharply to the Republican Party. And it's because of the Lumbee vote. The Lumbee make up another 33%. And so not only have Republicans gained there, they have a lot of room to gain in the surrounding counties. You look at the northern counties, Vance County, Halifax, 4 and 5 listed there. I think that's Northampton and Hartford. Republicans are gaining in these counties because they're losing population. So yeah, Democrats are gaining in the urban areas, but the rest of the state they're not. And so look at the population shifts is the other one to look at. A lot of areas are gaining population, and a lot of the counties that are trending Republican, Brunswick County, it's absurdly fast growing. It went from 100,000 people to 150,000. And from 2010 to 2019, it's trending hard to the right. Even as Wilmington is turning more blue or more purple, the areas around it are getting redder. So that's why when I look at North Carolina, you can kind of look at it from this side and say, maybe this isn't the best place long-term for Democrats because the population growth is balanced out by trends in both areas with a lot of floor. A lot of those counties in the East that are trending Republican, they still have room to grow. They still have 10, 15 percentage points Republicans could probably get out of them. Whereas there's places they can grow, Democrats can. But compare this to Georgia. So Georgia is a fascinating state. This is a state that went Republican in 2004, massive margins. Some of these suburban counties like Gwinnett County, a big county, diverse, it's actually a majority minority county. It voted for George Bush by 35 percentage points. It voted for Hillary by a pretty substantial margin last time. So when you look at Georgia, Georgia is actually a Republican state. It's not voted for Democrats since, I believe, 1992 when Bill Clinton won it.
Yeah.
But it's seen as Republican because it voted for Trump. But if you look at the state, look at the actual levels of where things are going. Where is all the population growth? It's in the Atlanta metro area. Where is the Democratic Party trending really hard? The Atlanta metro area. Atlanta is 55% of the population of Georgia, and it is trending to the left by an extreme margin. Meanwhile, the state areas Republicans are doing better. They either have already maxed out their votes, they can't get many more there, they can't get a margin much higher, or it's dying. The county is literally, they're gaining, just other voters are dying. So really, you look at it that way, long term, I actually think Georgia is a better state for Democrats than North Carolina. Even if you look at it right now, North Carolina is definitely a better target. But long term, 4, 8, 12 years, I don't see a lot of hope for Republicans in Georgia. And that's kind of one thing you can look at when you look at these demographic results. And demographics aren't destiny in politics, but in a lot of cases in the South, it's very polarized. Where voting is. That's actually another weird thing about North Carolina, is the racial polarization isn't as high as in Georgia. That's another area Republicans can gain in. In Georgia, they can't. So just even comparing these two states, you can kind of see why someone might look at North Carolina and say it voted for Democrats once. It has to be a better option. But look at the actual trend of where the state is going and say, this other state is just in a trajectory that is just out of this world, in my opinion.
Eric, and one thing I was going to add on Georgia especially is if you look at the Atlanta area, it looks like the fastest growing county here is Forsyth, and I think it's a pretty red type of county, and I think from 2012 to 2016, Forsyth had the biggest movement to Hillary of any county in Georgia, but it was something like, okay, well, instead of getting something like the 14% that Obama got there, she was at like 20. So that's 20% of the vote that she got there. That's a lot of room to improve.
Mm-hmm. And that's a rapidly growing county. It's actually historically, it's a fascinating county, mainly because of race. But I won't get into the race stuff here, but I definitely look up the history of Forsyth County, because it's kind
of. And then one kind of historical note as well on North Carolina is I remember watching election returns in North Carolina in 2008. It was a pretty big deal that of the big three races, President, Senate, and governor, they did not elect a white male Republican to any of those three because basically Obama won the presidential race, and the gubernatorial and Senate races each went to a white Democratic win. And where I'm going with that is, okay, yeah, it seemed good at the time, but they all turned out to be a one-term type of thing, because the next time Obama was up on the ballot in North Carolina, he lost it. Senator Kagan, as we know well, lost. And Governor Bev Perdue, who was the third the Democrat elected that year, was a one-term deal. So North Carolina has been it's voted Democratic, but it's been somewhat elusive since then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another interesting thing about North Carolina, I know Drew could probably add some stuff about North Carolina if he wants to, but North Carolina, when you look at it, Obama actually ran behind almost every statewide Democrat in 2008. He only won the state by 11,000 votes, while Democrats were cruising to all but 2 statewide offices. He ran behind, I think, a couple of candidates, but he really, relatively speaking, didn't do that well. Another one to look at, I wish I had the 2014 map here. It kind of shows the weaknesses. That map shows the weaknesses of looking at counties, because North Carolina does not have a bellwether county. The closest thing to a bellwether is New Hanover, which is Wilmington, and it's a Republican county that it's a bellwether in the sense of if Republicans have lost New Hanover, they've lost the state. You can't win it without that county. But in 2014, Kay Hagan did everything right. She won big margins in the urban areas. She won a lot of counties in the mountains. She did really well in the east, and she still lost because turnout was ultimately what mattered more in North Carolina than in other places. Most states have a county where you can look at it and be like, yeah, that's pretty representative of the state. North Carolina isn't like that. Just one other thing to think about, especially when looking at a county result. I don't know if Drew actually lives in one of the more rapidly growing areas in the state. He's finally going to be represented by a Democrat after the congressional redraw. We kind of got rid of the gerrymander. So that's just kind of a look at North Carolina and Georgia. I have some more stuff, obviously. We all have some more stuff. You can just go through our Twitter and just look through our images, and there'll be
yeah, that's all we do on there, basically.
Yeah. My Twitter account will basically just be either GIFs or maps, one of the two. But I'm trying to think if there's anything else we should cover before we go into questions.
Well, I think that as far as maybe getting started, if we have any viewers who want to get into this themselves, there's one of our friends.
Miles, I apologize for jumping in. We do have Dave Wasserman from Cook Political Report on with us. He's going to be doing Chuck Todd's show in about 5 minutes, but he might have a minute or two to pop a question or two to you guys. What do you think about that?
Awesome. Sure. Yeah, we'll take it.
All right, let me unmute you, Dave. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks. Great job, guys. I've never seen an election map before, and I was just wondering if you had to recommend one, what would be your favorite of all time?
Any map in general. One of the weirdest ones I've seen is the 2006 Texas gubernatorial race. This is a 4-way race. Republicans won it with, I think, 38% of the vote. And some of the counties are just bizarre. There's definitely interesting stuff you can look at weird elections like that, but that'd probably be up there for me. Would be there's counties that were won by an independent. There were counties that voted for Republican that haven't voted for him since, and Democrat that haven't voted for him since.
I think maybe for me, being from Louisiana, the 2003 gubernatorial election in Louisiana, just because even though the Democrat Kathleen Blanco won by only about 4 points, most of the map is pretty blue. And from today's context, what's so weird about it is she got blown out in the areas that we would think of as blue trending now, such as Jefferson Parish, which is Orleans suburbs. So just from today, it's just such a weird map. Is why I like it so much.
Well, thanks, guys. I'm going to go get some Raising Cane's.
I actually saw someone in the chat mention Minnesota's gubernatorial in '98, which was another crazy, just out of nowhere result.
Well, thanks. I think we also had a little difficulty there. Drew had gotten kicked out, and he's rejoined and now unmuted.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that, Drew.
I'm back.
Yeah, we were just talking about North Carolina and whatnot.
Yes, I heard a bit of it. Yeah.
I think so. Actually, Dave Wasserman actually just asked us what our favorite election map is. What would you say yours is?
Oh boy, what the favorite map I've done? I was rather pleased with that Connecticut form map. I really liked that. I think the colors worked well, and I think the district shape suited those.
You know, we had another question from someone in the chat room a few minutes ago from Doma with 100 H's, asked if you encountered a time traveler who offered you one map of a House district from November 2020, which one would you pick and why?
Kind of one of the districts I was talking about earlier, Minnesota 7. That would be an interesting one because if, say, Colin Peterson can hold on, I'd be very interested to see how he was able to do it.
I guess, so I would probably pick one from Texas. There's a couple of seats in Texas that flipped from Democratic to Republican in 2018. Actually, come to think of it, I pick Oklahoma's 5th congressional. My friend Noah Rednick predicted this before anyone else did. He was the only one who predicted this, that this seat would flip. And it was a very Republican seat and it went to a Democrat. I would want to see how that state votes in 2020 to see if it actually holds, how that actually changes. So that's a good example of an area that's voted Republican forever. And has just all of a sudden trended sharply to the Democratic Party starting in 2016.
True.
I think he might have gotten booted again.
Did we lose Drew again? All right, I'll keep an eye out for you in the sidebar there, and if I see you again, I'll re-add you. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
maybe a little bit of a connection issue.
Before we do another question, I think Miles was going to say something about Dave's redistricting app. Was it started on?
Yeah, I was going to say Dave's redistricting app is a good maybe way to get started, or at least it's this program where you can basically do your own redistricting. We kind of talked about that some with gerrymandering earlier, but what Dave's redistricting app is, it's a really good way to kind of get to know the partisanship of a state. You know, maybe Eric can talk a bit more about that.
Yeah. And I'll go through a couple more questions before I get into that, but the website it's called Dave's Redistricting App 2.0, I believe, is the one you want to use. Very user friendly. It has cloud saves. If your website crashes, you don't lose your data. That's big. I was dealing with this back in 2014, and I'd be drawing a map of California, and then it would crash, and I'd lose all the results, which is just but use the new one. The new one's great.
I see Drew's back. I'm unmuting him again. And as I do, I see another interesting question just popped in that said, for the panel generally, is there a predicted market that you think is particularly mispriced or inaccurate? Or if you're not following the market pricing too closely, is there a conventional wisdom on a particular race, particular seat, state outcome, national outcome, whatever it might be, that you think your insights are most at odds with the conventional wisdom?
I would say that maybe at the crystal ball, one Senate race that we've gotten some pushback for is our rating in Kansas. That's a state that the Democrats have been somewhat bullish on, assuming the Republican nominee is going to be former Secretary of State Chris Kobach. A lot of Democrats are pretty bullish on their chances as there, but at the end of the day, we still rate that race as likely Republican, just because in order for the Democrats to lose that type of seat, they're just going to have to be a massive amount of Trump voters who don't vote for Kobach. So maybe that's one we're sort of at odds with some of the other maybe pundits on. I know there's this guy on Twitter who keeps saying that the Senate race in Michigan is a toss up. We're still keeping that one as leans down.
Yeah. Actually, not to go to North Carolina too much, I am more bullish on North Carolina for Republicans than most are, especially with the Senate race. This is mainly due to a candidate quality thing. I think people have been tending to overrate people who fundraise a lot of money and be like, they're raising a lot of money, they must be a good candidate. I don't think Cal Cunningham is an especially good candidate. No relation, by the way. I'm not related to Joe Cunningham either. We're different. There's not a whole lot of Cunninghams in the Carolinas, but I'm not related to them. But I think people have been overrating candidates that can raise a lot of money a little bit too much. And I've just not seen a lot from Cal Cunningham that suggests that he's a superb candidate. But that's just one I would say.
If I had to pick one, I'd say I think people are undervaluing Biden's chances in Nebraska's 2nd district. It was very close in 2016, and I think Omaha seems like the kind of place you'd expect Joe Biden to improve upon Hillary Clinton. It's a fairly urban district. There's not much of a rural component to it. It only offers one electoral vote, but I think it could be quite interesting. I feel like there's not enough discussion on it.
And it did vote for
in 2008, but it hasn't gotten a whole lot of attention since then.
We had another question here in the chat from Jay Colbert asking why you guys don't, if you don't, trade on Predicted. I don't know if you caught the first session now some 5 hours ago with Harry Crane, but one of his first fundamental rules and what he whacked all the time is that he doesn't bet on Predicted, that he doesn't put his money where his mouth is. And that statistician believes that any forecaster ought to be willing to do so. So do you guys trade on your own theses anywhere? Are you prohibited by your employers from doing so? And if you don't, and if you're not prohibited from doing so, why don't you?
I mean, for me, I would say I'm not really in this for money. Not to be offended, not to say that in a bad way. It's just, it just really hasn't crossed my mind.
For me, it's when I put my money in politics, it's tended to go bad. I donated to Martha McSally last time and she lost. So that's kind of dissuaded me from ever donating to anyone ever again. Because obviously that's jinxing it. If you donate to someone and they lose, and that's the only person you donated to. But no, I haven't actually put too much thought into doing it because I don't actually do a lot of predictions. Although I got all but one state in 2018 for the Senate right, but it was Arizona. So maybe I should bet for everything but Arizona because I seem to have a problem with that state.
For me, I'm just not keen on the idea of putting money on the line for it. There's too much uncertainty, I think, for me to get into that.
Craig Schwein is asking, I'm sorry, Eric, go ahead.
Sorry, if you ever paid attention to politics, doing it too close, doing it too far out, it's like early voting. You can early vote for someone 3 weeks out, and then 2 weeks before the election, something terrible comes out, and you're like, I don't want to vote for that person anymore. That's kind of the fear, would be long term.
So I was starting to say, Craig Schwein wanted to know what you guys think about Nate Cohn's recent article about Trump's electoral college advantage, improving with minority and younger voters, but losing favorability with seniors. You guys see that trend happening?
Well, I will just say, generally, one of the things that I think this is something that Dave Wasserman has talked about as well. The Democrats need to prepare for the very real chance that Trump can maybe get a lesser share of the popular vote, but still win because of the Electoral College. It's easy to see if Trump can, generally speaking, if he can hold his own in some of these Rust Belt states, it's easy to see Trump maybe Biden doing a bit better than Hillary in states like Texas and California, which are still pretty, if Biden wins California by more than Hillary, that's really no more electoral votes. It's pretty easy to see Biden coming closer in Texas, but still not to the point of flipping it. So I've seen some models that have Trump losing the popular vote by 5 or 7 million votes compared to 2016, where he only lost by, I think, 2 million and still winning. So that's a very real advantage that he has.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll just try to throw here in before the end is that I think there is a possibility of that. I've tended to be less bullish on Trump, mainly because his margin in these states was 70,000 votes across 3 Rust Belt states. And in a lot of these states, he only got around the same margins that George Bush got in 2004. The difference is just the Democratic vote share was lower. So there's definitely a possibility he could gain there while also losing in California and Texas and Georgia and these other states. The stuff I'm looking at, the polls I'm looking at, indicate Biden has an advantage in most of the swing states. So that's just where I put my money right now, if I were going to be doing something like that. But you never know. I mean, the state level polls were wrong in 2016. The federal ones are on point. The state level ones were off. So maybe that's what we'll see this time again.
I would say I'm skeptical of him gaining among minority and younger voters. I would say it's more likely if his approval rating were 5 points higher than it is currently. But as it stands, given his current approval rating, I would be more skeptical of that. If he were 10 points popular, yeah, I think that'd be a distinct possibility. But I think he's too underwater to make substantial gains.
Makes sense. Well, gentlemen, the clock is telling me that is about a wrap, but I'm pleased to report to you guys that this has been by far the most engaged hour judging by the text chat within Zoom. I mean, mappers have engaged and attentive following, as well they should, and we are so glad that you guys could join us, provide your insights today. I absolutely love the work that all of you guys can do. If we can just go around to each of you and let viewers know where they can follow your work.
Yes, so basically all of us are always on Twitter. My handle is @JMilesColeman. You can also find my work every week at Sabato's Crystal Ball as well. Guys, if you do a quick Google search for Sabato's Crystal Ball, it should basically pop up.
You can find me on Twitter @DECunningham2. And I also publish a lot of my stuff in Elections Daily. I'm the editor-in-chief there, so a lot of this, so there's other people than me there, and a lot of them are publishing better articles than me, actually most of them. So that's a good follow to look at as well. But DECunningham2 on Twitter.
You can follow me on Twitter @SeñorRaposa. I'll put that in the chat if you need help spelling that. And pretty soon, starting Monday, you'll be able to find my articles on 270 to win. I'll have my first article out Monday on Connecticut.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Eric, Miles, Drew. This has been a fascinating hour. Thanks so much for anchoring the conference for us. Really appreciate it. It's nice to see all of you.
Sure.
All right.
And with that, conference participants, we are going to wrap things up. I want to thank all of our panelists, moderators, and guests for today who've been just hugely accommodating and generous with their time and their insights. Of course, I want to also thank all of you watching at home. And yes, of course, we know that all of you are at home, but lockdown or no, it is not easy to take a few hours away from work or family, and we really appreciate your spending this time with us. We hope we've made it worth your while. Hope to be able to continue the conversation with you after today as well. As we said throughout the conference, all of the sessions will be archived at oldbull.tv. That's oldbull.tv permanently, so feel free to relive the memories or catch up on the ones that you missed there at your convenience. You can also follow us on Twitter @oldbulltv. Continuing to engage with all of you further. Thank you once again. Stay healthy, and we hope to see you soon. Bye.